Well, good evening, District 18 Toastmasters. My name is Kathleen Davis, and I am your Program Quality Director. I want to welcome each and every one of you to our first Mastery Monday presentation for the Toastmaster year 2021-2022. Mastery Monday takes place on the fourth Monday of every month from 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this Toastmasters Zoom channel. The link can be found on your District 18 calendar or the Mastery Monday page and accessible from the Education and Training tab on our website. Mastery Mondays is a forum for Toastmasters members to take part in a dynamic presentation where they are given the opportunity to grow their communication and leadership skills. Tonight is no different. In fact, you are in for quite a treat to kick off this new year. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I would like to go over a disclaimer and some virtual housekeeping etiquette. By attending this Mastery Monday presentation, you give permission for your image and voice to be recorded. This recording, however, will only be used as reference material by other Toastmasters and will not be available to the general public. Please ensure that your microphone is muted in order to eliminate any background noise or distractions for our presenter. There will be an opportunity for you to unmute and ask questions when instructed to do so. I would like to introduce your speaker for this evening. This gentleman has been a Toastmaster since 2012. He is a past president, past area director, club mentor, treasurer, and currently is your District 18 Parliamentarian. I would like to introduce you to Bill Buckley.
Thank you for that introduction, Kathleen. And good evening, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome to this presentation on Robert's Rules of Order. This is not your typical slide presentation of Robert's Rules, so I want to give you that warning at the beginning. This is a slide presentation that I have used in the past. I put together and modify it for my audiences. I have two objectives this evening. For those who are relatively new to Robert's Rules of Order, I want to give you information that will help you feel more comfortable in using Robert's Rules of Order in your club meetings. And for those of you who are familiar with Robert's Rules of Order and already use it in your club meetings, I want to give you some nuggets that will help you do a better job of using Robert's Rules of Order. I have a couple disclaimers. I am not a professional parliamentarian. This is a hobby, and I am very passionate about it. I have been doing the Robert's Rules of Order longer than I have been a Toastmaster. I have used Robert's Rules of Order at clubs that I belong to outside of Toastmasters. As club president at Toastmasters International, SSA Toastmasters Club, I have used Robert's Rules of Order for my executive meetings with my fellow officers and at the monthly club meetings, business meetings. As well, this past year, I was acting parliamentarian for the club president. I added the second bullet because I just didn't want to have a single bullet, though I do have a lot in common with Brad Pitt and have been in a major motion picture and a daily soap opera on TV. Despite the rumors, I have not been a stand-in for Brad Pitt. That's my disclaimers. My references. I have two references. The Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, 12th edition, and Toastmasters International, the club constitution for clubs of Toastmasters International, and the bylaws of Toastmasters International. You cannot utilize Robert's Rules of Order and not be aware of what the bylaws of an organization say. Robert's Rules of Order says the activities of an organization must be conducted in compliance with its bylaws. So the president and the officers should really have a copy of the Toastmasters International bylaws and any amendments made to them. Now, I want to draw your attention to the abbreviations, the RONR 12 and the RONR 12 in parentheses, the section symbol, and 2 numbers. These you will see throughout my presentation. The RONR, of course, stands for Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, 12th edition. The symbol for section is section 44, number 1. On questions, please post your questions in the chat box and I will answer them in the order received during the time for questions at the end. You will see by the agenda why I do it this way, because we have a lot to cover. And this is the agenda. We're going to look at why use Robert Rules of Order and how to learn Robert's Rules, handling emotion, classification of emotions, a special word about. I'm going to identify 6 motions that can create havoc in a club meeting if you're not aware of these motions. Order of precedence, debating. Now you'll notice between debating and voting, I have a section on quorum, where we want to discuss quorum and what a majority vote means and 2/3 vote means before we get into voting. We're going to learn how to amend a motion, look at meeting agenda and order of business and minutes, and then we'll get into your questions. So why use Robert's Rules of Order? There is no argument. Using Robert's Rules of Order for all of your meetings makes life so much more relaxing and easier than not using it. So why do we use it? In addition to that, well, first of all, Toastmasters International, Article 9, Rules of Order, Parliamentary Authority says, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, shall be the final authority as to parliamentary procedure. And I have a little special note there. Section 2 says a parliamentarian may be appointed at each meeting by the club president. So if you have somebody in your club who is real familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, you can ask them to sit in with you and act as your parliamentarian. There are a couple of things I want to point out. Rights are observed. How are rights observed by using Robert's Rules of Order? Well, the right of the majority to rule and the right of the minority to be heard. Another right observed is the right of the individual to participate in the decision-making process in your club. Note that courtesy is observed. Courtesy is observed through debate occurring about the topic and not about the person who submitted the motion. People speak only after being recognized by the chair, the person who is running the meeting. And a person can speak multiple times, but only after everyone has been given an opportunity to speak. Notice also that it says balance occurs. Balance occurs because we have both positive and negative viewpoints are heard during discussion. And when voting to make a decision occurs, both the agreeing and disagreeing votes are taken and the agreeing and disagreeing voters are listened to. How do you learn Robert's Rules of Order? It seems that this is really difficult for a lot of people. This is my opinion. You should approach Robert Rules of Order as you would if you were studying any foreign language. I know the majority of us has probably studied Spanish or French in high school. And we knew that French or Spanish or German, whatever it was we studied, had its own grammar rules and its own vocabulary. Well, this is true with Robert's Rules of Order. It has its own grammar rules and its own vocabulary. And if you pay attention to those, you should have no problem in learning Robert's Rules of Order. Now, let's talk about handling emotion. This is in Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, 12th edition, sections 4 through 7. That's that notation above. Robert's Rules of Order actually brings a question to the assembly. That's what a motion does. It's like you're saying, hey, why don't we buy award ribbons and give them to those members who give their icebreaker speech? And someone else in the group says, yeah, that's a good idea. And then someone else says, nah, I don't want the club to spend money this way. Robert's Rules of Order has its own grammar of putting the questions to the group. It uses its own vocabulary. So note that in handling a motion, Robert's Rule says you only handle one motion at a time. And this is the way it works. A member first seeks recognition from the floor. This is respect. And the chair will recognize the member, the one who presents the motion. And the person that does that is called the mover. A motion is made. I move that we purchase award ribbons from Toastmasters International and give it to those people who give their icebreaker speeches. Someone will say, I second the motion if they feel that this is a worthy thing to consider. The chair will restate the question or the motion. Now, the chair will validate the motion, and this is where the chair needs to be aware of what's a valid motion and what is not. So the chair, after it validates that it is a valid motion, he will state or she will state it is moved and second that, and they will repeat the motion. After that is done, the chair then opens the floor for debate. And you'll notice I say if they're debatable. There are some motions that are not debatable. So the chair will say the floor is open for discussion of the motion too, and this becomes the main motion, the one motion to be discussed. After the debate, the chair puts the question to a vote. All of those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The chair then will announce the result of the vote. The ayes have it, the motion is carried. The nays have it, the motion is not carried. So this is in a simple way of how to present a motion according to Robert's rules. It's good to know that motions fall into certain classes. You'll see this from time to time in your reading or when you're discussing Robert's Rules of Order with others, and it's a good thing to be aware of. Motions fall into a certain classification. Each classification serves a purpose, and the motion within that class serves the purpose of the motion. Let's take a look at a couple of these. There are 5 classifications of motions. We have the main motion. This brings business before the assembly. Next, we have what's called privileged motions. These deal with the needs of the members. For instance, recess or adjourn certainly does meet with the needs of the members. And you'll notice I have in parentheses some abbreviations. The S stands for that it's second. The ND stands for not debatable, or if it's a D there, it's debatable. A is for amendment, and M is for a majority vote is required. The next classification of motion, number 3, is subsidiary motions. These help dispose of the main motion. Certainly to lay a motion on a table, when that is made, gets rid of the motion from the group and puts it on a table to be considered later on through the meeting. Call of a previous question also helps dispose of the main motion. This brings debate to a close on a motion, and we're going to look at some of these in a little more detail later on. Limit or extend debate. Here we're going to say that if we limit debate, we're basically taking away from the members their opportunity to spend more time speaking pro or con for the particular motion. You'll notice that this needs a second. It's not debatable. It can be amended, but it requires 2/3 of vote if you're going to limit or extend debate. We have referred to the committee. That also takes the motion away from the group that is considering it and gives it to a committee for them to deal with it. You'll notice that this needs a second. It is debatable. It can be amended, but it takes a majority vote in this case for everybody to agree to refer to committee. And amend, of course, we know amend changes the main motion. And you amend by inserting or dropping out or adding other statements to a motion. Basically, according to Robert's rules, you have only one main motion and you can have two secondary motions. And we'll talk about this when we get to amending motions. The fourth classification is incidental motions. These are procedural motions that affect the proceedings. Suspend the rules. That certainly will affect the proceeding because you're saying we're not going to use Robert's Rule of Order for our meeting. That needs to be seconded. You'll notice takes 2/3 vote. And by the way, note, you cannot suspend your bylaws. Withdraw a motion. The maker of the motion, the mover, before the chair restates it, as we talked about above, can withdraw the motion. Call for division of the question. What this says is that the motion is really too complicated, and we want to break it up into sections. This certainly can affect the proceedings by extending the proceeding time. A raise of hands is normally used to divide the question rather than a voice vote. Notice that this also is second. It's not debatable, it is amendable, and needs a majority. And of course, you can appeal a motion that has already been passed or appeal the ruling of the chair, and we'll talk about these later on, this particular motion. 5, there are motions that bring questions back before the assembly. Once a motion has been approved and you're moving on to something else, maybe you think that, hey, I want to reconsider that motion, or I want to rescind that motion. And we're going to look at these two in more detail later on. So those are the classifications of motions. Now, I want to have a special word about 6 motions that can really affect your meeting and can cause you some headaches within your meetings if you're not aware of the particulars of these particular motions. Let's take a look at the first one, point of order. That's covered in section 23, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised section 12. This is an incidental motion, and in my opinion, it is the most misused motion of all motions. Many years ago, we had a member in our club who would always call out point of order, no matter what was said or who was saying what. So I contacted the individual. I said, can we have lunch together? Because I really thought the individual didn't understand point of order and was really asking for points of information. And so after I explained to him the difference, we went back, and of course, in the future meetings, all he did was call out points of information, but at least it stopped him calling out points of order. Point of order is a tool. It's used to draw attention to a breach in rules, and the chairperson or your parliamentarian should know this. It also identifies an irregularity in procedure. So what is a valid point of order? Well, not speaking to the motion, getting off tangent, talking about your vacation, or moving away from the agenda. Sometimes in our club meeting, that happens. We move away from the agenda. Or how about the speaker's time has expired and they keep talking and talking and talking? You can raise a point of order on that. Or the motion maybe contravenes the bylaws of your club. The thing about a point of order is you can interrupt the speaker. Doesn't require a second, doesn't require debate, no vote. All the member does is shouts, point of order. And the chair will recognize the speaker, determine whether or not what they're saying is a valid point of order or not. Special word about points of information and parliamentary inquiry. These two motions are really asking for help. They differ in a way. Points of information is an incidental motion mostly directed to the chair or through the chair to another member for information relative to the business at hand. And this again is where I spoke to our individual saying, really what you're looking for is points of information. This also can interrupt the speaker. The member needs to say, point of information. It requires no second, no debate, and no vote required. Parliamentary inquiry is just a bit different from points of information. This is an incidental motion, but it's asking for information on a parliamentary matter. It can interrupt the speaker as well. There's no second required, no debate, and no vote required. The member can call out a parliamentary inquiry, please, and the chair will recognize them and ask them what their inquiry is, and maybe they want to know, can you please explain the voting process that we're taking on this particular motion? And of course, again, the chair will respond with whether this is, if he thinks it's a valid inquiry, he'll respond. If not, it will say that this motion is out of order. Previous question. I set this by itself because in previous question, this is a subsidiary motion that ends debate. The member states, I move the previous question. Now, a lot of people think that all they have to do is shout out previous question. But no, this is one of those motions where you cannot interrupt the speaker. You have to be recognized by the chair. And this does require a second. So after that motion to move the previous question is second, the chair moves immediately to vote on the previous question motion. And it requires a 2/3 vote in order to do the previous question. If it passes, if there are more ayes, then after they voted on previous question, then they must move to the main motion, the motion that was before this, and vote on the main motion, notice, without debate. Why would somebody raise the motion, I move the previous question? Well, maybe they think there's been just too much debating. I'm tired of all this debating. I want an answer on the motion. The last two that I want to consider in a little bit more detail is reconsider and rescind. These bring the motion back, a motion that has been approved and moved on. Now, I do want to say this, that if a motion has already been approved and acted on, for instance, if we agreed that we're going to spend $50 on awards and this $50 has already been spent, then you cannot reconsider or rescind the motion. Section 37 says, in reconsider, it can only be made by someone who voted on the prevailing side. In other words, we don't want the losers always bringing up during the meeting, I want to reconsider, I want to reconsider. No, only someone who voted on the prevailing side can reconsider a motion. And it can be made only at the same meeting that the decision to be reconsidered was made. Now, they can move to reconsider this vote at any time during the meeting, so they can wait till where the meeting almost comes to an end. The member says, I move to reconsider the vote on the motion to buy award ribbons from Toastmasters International to give to those who give icebreaker speeches. Notice that for reconsider, a second is needed, no debate, but it does require a 2/3 vote to reconsider a motion that has already been passed in that meeting. Rescind is different. Rescind says that I can wait until the next meeting to rescind a motion that was passed in the previous meeting. The vote is determined by whether a notice was given. And look at the difference. With a notice, a majority vote is required to pass. If there's no notice, then it requires 2/3 vote. So now what does it mean that a notice must be given? Well, that says that Bill Buckley, if he's going to reconsider a motion that was passed in the last meeting, before or at the announcement of the next meeting, he needs to let the members know that this is what he's going to do. Or if the secretary is going to post a call to a meeting, for instance, is going to send out a notice that we're going to meet next month on Tuesday at such and such a time, then the member can give that to the secretary and give notice. That way, it only requires a majority to pass. The member says, I move to rescind the motion relating to and then they state the motion. Let's look at order of precedence. This is important to know. It really is, for the chairperson and for them to have their parliamentarian with them. The Roberts Rules of Order gives certain motions precedence over other motions. This helps maintain consistency in a meeting's function. Knowing this order and using it properly will keep the meeting flowing without interruption in its pace. Now, you can download a lot of these order of precedence sheets from the internet on Robert's Rules of Order Newly Revised 12th edition. Or you can order a packet of 10 from Toastmasters International. I think they go for $4.50. So how does order of precedence work? Well, you'll notice that it really involves two classes, the privileged class and a subsidiary class. The first 13 motions are involved in order of precedence. So if we are debating a limit on debate, if that motion has been moved and seconded and we're debating that, and all of a sudden Bob Logan makes a motion, I move to refer to committee the motion, the limit debate. Well, notice where that falls in the order of precedence, from high to low. That's below the limit of debate. That has less precedence. So that is out of order. But let's say we're debating the motion to limit time on a debate, and Ben says, I move to adjourn. Well, the chairperson would look at his chart and say, that motion is in order, and they would immediately move to adjourn, to discuss the motion to adjourn. And that motion, of course, requires to be second and is debatable, and it requires the majority to pass. So knowing the order of precedence is important in using Robert's Rules of Order. Let's talk a little bit about debating. You just noticed that we can set a limit on debates. Robert Rules says that you can debate twice, and I believe it's 10 minutes. But we can, of course, our meetings are shorter. We can set a time limit on debate, and it would be good to do that. When debating, always address the chair and speak to the subject at hand, not to the individual that made the motion. And that's what that says, debate the motion and not the person. Normally in debates, the mover of the motion, the person that presented the motion, can be the first to speak. And the chair, if at all possible, should alternate between speakers, should call on someone who is against the motion, and the next call on someone who is for the motion. Now, before we get into voting, I want to talk about a quorum. I'm going to give you Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, the 12th. It's statement from section 40 on a quorum. A quorum in an assembly is the number of members who must be present in order that a business can be validly transacted. It also states that the quorum of any other deliberative assembly with an enrolled membership, unless the bylaws provide for a smaller quorum, is a majority of all the members. Now note this, a quorum established at the beginning of the meeting can be broken. Now, if it is broken during the debate can continue. However, at that point where no quorum is present, no other motions can be moved or debated, and the motion discussed cannot be adopted, or the motion debated cannot be adopted. So basically, without a quorum, the meeting is a discussion about how everybody is and how they enjoyed their vacation. But I want you to notice what a quorum is as defined by Toastmasters International. As defined by the club bylaws for clubs of Toastmasters International, Article 5, it says a majority of the, quote, active individual membership shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of all business of this club. A majority of, and quote, club executive committee shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of the committee's business. So in this case, we're considering the bylaws of Toastmasters International, which is what we should do. Now let's take a look at the club constitution for clubs of Toastmasters International, Article 2 membership, Section 3, because we want to define what an active individual membership is. Active individual membership is conferred upon a paid member in good standing with Toastmasters International. Active individual members attend club meetings, have voting privileges, may be elected as an officer of the club, shall be counted towards a quorum or the club membership, may participate in speech contests if they fulfill the other eligibility criteria, and may have a place on the regular speakers program. Now, I have seen where some clubs have added addendums to the bylaws that they've adopted from Toastmasters, and they said that an active individual member is really someone who's attended the last 5 meetings consecutively. So they've really narrowed down what an active individual membership for voting purposes. So we're continuing with voting. When no one else seeks debate, the chair asks, "Are you ready for the question?" Followed by, the question is on the adoption of the motion that, and the chair repeats the motion. The chair explains the method of voting, whether he wants to use or she wants to use show of hands, a counted vote, or ballot voting. Now the chair can vote. The chair votes when the vote is by ballot, or the vote will change, the chair's vote will change the result of the vote. So a tie vote means that the motion did not carry. Now the chair does not have to vote. And we're going to see that in a committee, the chair can also vote. And I've made a note here, beware of the vote needed to pass the motion on the floor. When you're voting, you need to know whether it requires a majority or does it require a 2/3 vote. Again, in looking at voting, fractions do not count. A majority vote is defined as more than half of the votes cast, excluding abstentions by eligible voters. This is Robert's Rules 44.1. 2/3 means at least 2/3 of the votes cast, excluding abstentions by eligible voters. This is Robert's Rules 44.3. Let's take a look at an example. We have 35 members in our club. 25 are present and vote. Well, a quorum, according to Toastmasters International, is a majority of the members. That makes it 18. However, a majority of the vote cast requires 13. So we have 25 present, so we meet the quorum, but now we need to determine if of the 25 that cast votes, if it's a majority required, does that motion pass by 13 or more? A 2/3 vote cast says it requires 17. All right, moving on from debating and quorums and voting, let's take a look at the next thing that we want to do with a motion. Sometimes we want to amend the motion. This is covered in Robert's Rules of Order newly revised in Section 12, items 35 through 38. We have a main motion. I move that the club buys award ribbons from TI. And somebody else within the club says, I move that we amend the motion on the floor to add the following, but spends no more than $50. So now we have an amendment. This amendment is the main motion, and it is treated as a main motion. It's moved, that is, it's presented, it's second. We debate it and we vote on this, and since it's an amendment, it requires a majority to pass. So let's take a look and see what happens to this amendment. If the amendment does not pass, then we go back to the main motion. I move that the club buys award ribbons from TI, and we pick up on that motion as being our main motion. But if the amendment does pass, then the main motion next becomes, I move that the club buys award ribbons from TI, Toastmasters International, but spends no more than $50. So that now the amendment becomes part and parcel of the main motion. Now note that an amendment can be but only one. You can add an amendment to an amendment, and this is known as a second degree. And that's covered in Robert Rules 12th edition in section 12. So that's basically on how to deal with an amendment. An amendment is treated like any other main motion, but it is added to the motion once the amendment is passed. Let's talk about meeting agenda. Let's go through a couple of things. I think everybody is familiar with our meeting agendas. You should have an agenda for every business meeting. The basic format of the meeting agenda is that of the order of business. Agenda allows speakers to prepare for the meeting. They can see what we're going to be discussing and talking about in our meeting so they can prepare. Maybe I want to change a motion that's going to be discussed or presented. It encourages participation. It ensures that important topics are covered, and it helps meetings to start and finish on time, provided we don't get any calls of points of order. You've gotten away from the agenda. Order of business. Again, I think most of us in Toastmasters are familiar with an order of business. We have the date convened, the officers present and absent, reports from the vice presidents, additional committee reports, unfinished business, not old business, it's unfinished business, new business, and then adjournment. Now, there are two things I want to talk about in this order of business meeting, just for those of you who are really familiar with Robert's Rules of Order. Let's talk about unfinished business. Unfinished business is that business that was being discussed at the last meeting when the last meeting was adjourned, or it was motions that were postponed to a certain time. Now, we're not talking about a special order. That's different. But motions that were postponed to a certain time, maybe to the next meeting, they go into this unfinished business. A special order is a priority order. This is where, for instance, we're going to nominate officers. That can become a special order and not unfinished business. Committees. In a committee, the chair of the committee has the right to make and debate motions. They can close or limit debate motions, not allowed in committees. They cannot close or limit debates. They follow normally informal procedures. And standing committee members can be voted on at the same time as officers, or they can be appointed by the president at a later time. I think most of us are aware of that. Let's talk briefly about minutes, and then we'll get into questions if we can. Minutes are the only surviving record of action taken. I think sometimes someone must go overboard on minutes. We don't need to record everything everybody said, and we don't need to record everything that was second. Normally, the minutes will contain the disposition of a motion and how the vote went for that motion, whether it was passed or not passed. And the chair should always call for corrections before approval. Corrections to minutes are made in the text of the minutes being approved. Now, if someone objects to a correction, then that correction, that objection, is handled as a motion. And then you get into where it's second debated, etc. Current meeting minutes are noted that those previous meeting minutes were approved as corrected. Now notice, A formal motion to approve the minutes is not necessary. And a matter of fact, Robert's rule says that the chair can ignore a motion to approve the minutes. The chair will normally then say that there being no corrections to the minutes stand approved. Or there being corrections to the minutes stand approved as corrected. I just want to show you that Toastmasters International has an excellent template for club executive meetings and club meeting agendas on its website. And I just made a copy of here. I've used this in the past. I used this when I was chairman of the alignment committee. This is an excellent format, has everything that's needed to be contained in the minutes. And so I would recommend the presidents of the clubs to go out and download this if they're looking for a format. Well, I know we've covered an awful lot of information, and I want to thank you for your attention. I really appreciate you being here tonight and listen to me harangue you about motions. I know it can be a very dry subject, but I'm always excited about Robert's Rules of Order. And I'm glad that I have several friends in our district that are parliamentarians that I can turn to, because like I said, I'm not a professional. I just love Robert's Rules of Order. Thank you so much. Questions?
I don't see anything in the chat. If somebody wants to unmute themselves, if they have a question and ask their question. I think you were quite thorough, Bill, but hopefully some of our attendees have questions. So please don't be afraid to unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah, I'm going to lean on Mervyn too if I have a problem answering the question. I have two things. I have my book here that I have read, my Robert's Rules of Order, and I have Mervyn. So I'm ready for anything tonight.
All right, so we do have a question. John and Mary Kallenberger ask, if a member holds more than one office, do they have 2 votes?
No. A member has 1 vote and 1 vote only. Otherwise, I would have been treasurer, president, and secretary and would have voted 3 times on some motions I didn't like about that our club had. 1
You'd
vote.
be your own quorum.
That's right. Thank you.
Kathleen Pereira says, thank you, William. Very thorough presentation.
Well,
And
thank
I
you.
concur.
Thank you. With that, I will turn the meeting back over to Mr. Ben, our district director. And again, thank you, Ben and Kathleen, for inviting me tonight to be part of this. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. And for the fall business meeting, I will be leaning on you heavily for the parliamentary procedures. So thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
As Mr. Buckley mentioned so eloquently a moment ago, the chart of motions you'll find on the Toastmasters website. Set of 10 is $4 American, and it's item 237 Charlie, 237C.
Point taken,
So
hint
you
acknowledged.
So you can order your own.
Thank you, Mervyn. Wen Fei says thank you. She learned a lot. All right.
Thank you.
So again, thank you, Mr. Buckley, for carving out some time on your Monday evening to give this presentation. Thank you to everyone who attended our Mastery Monday session. I do want to remind you that the International Convention will be, the virtual International Convention will be from the 23rd of August to the 28th. So if you are a president or a secretary, please make sure that you are in attendance to vote for the business meeting, which will start on Thursday, the 26th at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yes, Eastern, not Mountain. Eastern Standard Time. So 8 o'clock in the morning is when the business meeting will begin. All club presidents and club secretaries in clubs in good standing have a vote, and there are proxies for the international convention. There are no proxies for the district business meeting. All right, so for the international business meeting, you can assign proxies. Each president and secretary has a vote. If one of those members will be in attendance, that attending delegate or officer must indicate that they will be voting. Because if the other officer decides to send the proxy, then both proxies will get sent to the default, which would be the district director or anybody else that you designate. So if there's going to be an officer in attendance, whether it be president or secretary, they have to indicate that they are voting. And then the other officer can proxy their vote to that officer. Does that make sense? All right, that's something new this year that took a couple people by surprise, and only reading into the proxy notices sent by Toastmasters International did we realize that that's what was taking place. So please make sure. However, if you are able to attend the virtual conference, there is a plethora of events that they did not have last year, and offering quite a few speakers, educational sessions. Now, unlike last year where the entire convention was free, there is a $25 fee for some of the events, but they are well worth it. So please make sure you check it out. The agenda is on the Toastmasters.org website. Just click on events and go to International Convention, and you can see everything that they have planned. They have it planned already, and we will be voting not only on who the incoming international president would be for the next term, but also first vice president, second vice president, and odd number international directors. All right. Kathleen, did I miss anything? Nope. All right, gang. Well, thank you for attending. If you have any questions, please visit the District 18 website, go to About Us, and email us if you have any questions. Again, thank you for attending, and we're going to give you about 13 minutes back at your Monday evening. So again, thank you for attending. Have a great night. Again, thank you, Bill.
Yes, thanks, Bill.